Mathematics webinar on the IRIS webinar series. It's so nice to see a large number of people have joined us today. I can see that there are a number of teachers, welcome teachers, and of course there are a very good number of students. We also seem to have people from other organizations who have joined, and you are all very welcome. Before we begin, we'd like to take you through a few slides just to introduce you to the IRIS National Fair. So the IRIS National Fair, as you know, is a platform that gives students an opportunity to get recognized on the world stage. The Initiative for Research and Innovation in STEM inspires students to ask questions and do projects for the good of society in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. The IRIS platform guides and mentors students to improve their research-based projects, and it also helps them to develop their ideas further. So the key objectives of the Initiative for Research and Innovation in STEM is to stimulate young minds to take an active interest in science and technology, and to encourage students to use research as a tool for creating new knowledge. The way in which IRIS differs from a number of platforms is that on IRIS, students are encouraged to present original innovations. They can, of course, build upon existing ideas and projects. However, they have to prove how they have developed that further and made it different to what the original idea actually was. That is, if they are going to be working on improving an already existing project. So the annual IRIS timeline goes as per what is on your screens as of now. And this is the time of the year when we are normally out doing workshops across schools in the country. But because of the present situation, we thought, why waste time? Let's get online and connect with people so that everybody is doing exactly what is supposed to be done as per the normal IRIS timeline. Now, I know there'll be a lot of questions about what happens next, etc. But at the end of the day, we are just encouraging everyone to stick to the timelines, to start working on their projects, and let's see what happens. None of us really know from day to day what's going to happen the next day. And so we're actually just doing exactly what would have been done had this pandemic situation not hit us as of now. We hope that the IRIS National Fair will happen sometime either in December or January of next year, like it did this year. This year also the IRIS National Fair happened in Jan. Now, the slide that is up now on your screens has a lot of importance because it defines the participation eligibility of students. Students who participate in IRIS need to be of Indian origin and need to be studying in schools based in India. You can participate individually or in a team of 2 students. There are 2 categories, junior, which is class 5 to 8, and senior, which is 9 to 12. The class 5 to 8 students qualify for special awards and for Broadcom Masters Awards, and students of 9 to 12 qualify for competition in the International Science and Engineering Fair. Now, there is one more point which we have here, which is of prime importance, and that is that students who have completed their class 12 board exams at the time of project submission will not be permitted to participate. So if you have finished your class 12 board exams, we are sorry, you are not eligible to participate in the IRIS National Fair. In the past, we have had people saying things like, we finished our class 12 board exams, but we are taking a gap year, and so we would like to participate. Again, we are very sorry, but any student who has finished with their class 12 board exams is not permitted to participate. So, ways in which people can be associated with IRIS. For students who have finished with their class 12 and are into their first year of college, or who are in their college, in their post-graduation, etc., you are more than welcome to come and help at IRIS as a volunteer. You can also be a mentor for other students who are participating in the IRIS National Fair. If you're a teacher, a parent, or a senior somewhere, please go ahead, mentor students. That would be great if you can mentor students and help them with their research and with their project. You can also collaborate with the IRIS National Fair. If you are from some other organization, please do get in touch with us. Write to us at contact@irisnationalfair.org, and we will be very happy to respond to you. Any other queries that you may have also, please feel free to write to us, and we assure you of a response. We would now like to introduce to you our expert for the day, Dr. Janki Ghosh. Dr. Ghosh is a member of the IRIS Scientific Review Committee. Her primary areas of research interest are in the use of technology in mathematics instruction, professional development of mathematics teachers, and popularization of mathematics. She regularly delivers lectures and conducts workshops in international and national conferences. She has published articles in proceedings of conferences as well as international journals, and has authored books for school students. Thank you so much, Janki ma'am, for sparing time to join us today. And we already have 142 participants in the room. So we're really excited to hear from you. So without further ado, ma'am, the screen is yours. Thank you so much, ma'am.
Thank you so much, Sharon, for having me here today. And thank you to your entire team, Shrey and Sasha, also for organizing this. It is always a great pleasure to interact with students. And one of the wonderful aspects of being associated with IRIS is that, I got this opportunity. Okay, so I will share my screen now, as I'll be using a PowerPoint presentation. Oops. Sorry. Yeah, is it visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Okay, yeah. So, yeah, so I thought that I'll make a title for this presentation, but then when I thought deeply about it, I think first I'll focus mainly on why it is exciting to do a mathematics project in the first place, and of course, what it means to do a mathematics project for IRIS. So exploring mathematics through a spirit of inquiry is what I hope to focus on. So why a mathematics project for IRIS? I mean, there are many subject domains, as you already know, and why should you think of doing a math project for IRIS? So one, of course, is it will be a very enriching and satisfying experience. You will get to learn mathematics in a very new way, and where possibly very differently from the way you've encountered it in school. And it will lead you to searching for problems yourself. So the way of learning will be such that the onus of learning will be entirely on you, and of course you'll have a mentor and somebody guiding you. But this experience is very different from the way you may have experienced mathematics at school. You'll obviously get to explore and solve a new problem and actually engage in doing research at such a young age. And I think that would be a very fruitful experience. And of course, all your friends will think you are really cool when you say that, I'm doing a math project. Okay. So, right. So I've already flashed the picture on the screen, but I want to begin with a very important uh, quotation on mathematics and about mathematics by a very important mathematician. So, this is a picture on the slide here. So, can you guess whose picture it is? You might have seen him. So, if there's any answer from the audience, I'll be happy to. Okay, so if there are no responses, this is a very, very well-known British actor.
Ma'am, there are people in the chat who are saying it's
Yes.
Sir Hardy.
This is not Hardy, definitely not Hardy. They have seen the slides as I was putting it up.
Aditya Chugh says this is Jeremy Irons playing GHR.
Yes. So this is Jeremy Irons, and he played the role of G.H. Hardy in the film The Man Who Knew Infinity, based on the book by Robert Kanigel, The Man Who Knew Infinity, on the life of Srinivas Ramanujan. And this is alongside the black and white picture is a one of the very few pictures of Hardy available actually. And so they really tried to make him look like Hardy. Anyway, why Hardy? Because he made it's a very well-known quotation which you must have heard. A mathematician, like a painter or a poet, is a maker of patterns. And if his patterns are more permanent than theirs, it is because they are made with ideas. So ultimately, everything begins with an idea. But you have to take that idea forward, and when it's a mathematical idea, it is really beautiful because it can be taken into many directions, and that is what exploration and research is all about. So, as we said, there are many subject categories in IRIS, and mathematics is one of them. Many years ago, this was not the case. That time, it was this competition was not even called IRIS, perhaps. But slowly, mathematics was brought in because clearly there cannot be hardly any subject in which mathematics doesn't play a role. So anyway, mathematics is an independent subject category here. And these are some of the listed areas: algebra analysis, combinatorics, graph theory, and so on. Geometry, topology, number theory, probability, and statistics. And of course, it mentions others. So you're not bound to only explore only in these areas, but it could be almost anything where mathematics is involved. Okay, so I hope to present a framework or a sort of a stepwise procedure which you kind of can follow, though this is not the hard and fast rule. But so I would categorize the projects into two categories. Probably one would be the applications approach, where you identify a topic which interests you and you explore particular aspect of it. You develop the mathematics, you learn the mathematics that is required to understand that application, and you find a new application either in mathematics itself or to some real life problem. So for example, you are very interested, let us say, in the area of genetics. I mean, you also have biology as a subject maybe, and you're very keen about delving deeper into the area of genetics, but also understanding how mathematics plays a role in that. So then maybe I would call this the applications approach, because you started with an area and you are looking at how mathematics can play a role, and then you're identifying a new problem there. Subsequently, I'll give more examples, so this will probably become clearer as we go along. In the second type, I call it the modeling approach, where you identify a problem in real life, which is compelling and needs a solution. You model it mathematically and then try to find a realistic solution. And after you found the solution, you try to interpret it in the real world terms. So this could be anything. I mean, surrounding you, we are already living in the midst of a pandemic, and there's so many problems which need to be solved. And suppose you take one aspect of it and you say, I want to delve deeper into this. then, and you collect data from your surroundings or through some source, and then you try to model the problem, then I would probably categorize it in the second type. So a project may typically consist of the following stages. So first is, as we said, we identify a topic or a problem for exploration. And then you search for relevant resources. So you don't want to do something which has already been, because especially for a competition like this, for a fair like this, you have to be very thorough with your work. So it is very important to do a literature review, read up, look up various websites and see what all work has already been done in this area. And maybe a mentor can also help you find out what all has been done. And you have to identify something different from this. Once you've done so, you need to articulate the aim of the project. This needs to be very specific, because trying to do multiple things about a problem doesn't really work out. So you focus on one or two aspects of it and you articulate or describe the aim of the project. And once you've done that, and you have the mathematical tools in place, you know, for example, that you have to use statistics, or you have to use, let's say, graph theory, for example, then you have to learn the mathematical knowledge that is required for that and formulate the problem. And if it's a pure mathematics problem, then maybe you would have to make a conjecture. You would like to make a conjecture. And then you use mathematics to solve the problem, or if it's a pure mathematics problem, it would be, you would probably be working on a proof of a theorem that you have conjectured. And finally, you would interpret the solution if it's a real life problem. So this is just a set of stages or steps which we can talk about, but this is not the only thing that is required. Okay, so a lot of the topics or areas that, there are many topics or areas which will interest you. And some of these are, let's say, the topic of fractals. So modeling nature. So we know that it was Benoit Mandelbrot who had said that if you really want to understand nature, then Euclidean geometry is not enough. You would need fractal geometry. So a lot of fractals are already there in nature. So you might like to explore those and develop fractal designs of your own, fractal patterns of your own. Climate change could also be an area which leads to very interesting problems. Genetics, we have already I've talked about, and maybe I will share more examples through the course of this presentation. Consumer behavior. How do people behave when they shop? And now it is more of online shopping nowadays. So how is the behavior of consumers? How does it change? Do people switch from one brand to the other for a particular type of commodity, or do they stick to certain kinds of brands? So this is their consumer buying behavior can also be explored and modeled. Cryptography is again a very interesting area which has multiple methods already existing. You must have heard of the RSA encryption, the public key encryption system. But then you can even create your own encryption method if you want. Computers and networking, there are tremendous applications of graph theory, image processing. I will share a little bit about this later. Search engine optimization. So we know that Google search uses the PageRank algorithm to rank web pages after they come up through the search. So how does the PageRank algorithm work, and can there be more optimal algorithms, because the PageRank algorithm is quite old now? And are there other kinds of things which can do search engine optimization better? Flight scheduling, air traffic, gambling and betting, and you just name it, any area that you pick up will have mathematics, and mathematics can be used to model and interpret many things. Also, there are a lot of unsolved problems which you can explore, and the internet is a repository. You will find those problems. But some of the great problems which had been unsolved for a very long time and have been solved. So, for example, the Fermat's last theorem, which states that, which was actually, the conjecture was proposed by Pierre de Fermat around 1637. And he said that the story goes that, in his notebook, in a small margin of the notebook, he wrote this, that the equation x raised to the power n plus y raised to the power n is equal to z raised to the power n has no whole number solution in x, y, and z for n greater than or equal to 3. For n equal to 2, of course, we know we have the Pythagoras theorem, and we can find triples x, y, z which satisfy x square plus y square is equal to z square. But for n greater than equal to 3, there are no whole number solutions. And he mentioned this in the margin of his book. And he said, unfortunately, the margin is too small to accommodate the proof. So, well, that was way back in 1637. And for centuries, mathematicians struggled to prove this conjecture. And only in 1994, it was Andrew Wiles who proved it. So this is a picture of Andrew Wiles. So this was an unsolved problem for a very long time. And it is said that Andrew Wiles had a dream about solving this problem when he was as young as 10 years of age. I mean, it was his fascination. It was almost became like an obsession for him that he had to solve this problem. And that really built him into the great mathematician that he became. There are many unsolved problems, like the Goldbach's conjecture, which is still just a conjecture. It says that every even number greater than 2 can be expressed as the sum of 2 primes. So if you look at 4, 4 is 2 plus 2, 6 is 3 plus 3, 8 is 3 plus 5, 10 can be written as 3 plus 7, and 5 plus 5, and so on. So you can obviously, we can list out lots of even numbers and write them as a sum of 2 primes, but that's not a proof. And this conjecture was suggested by Leonhard Euler to Christian Goldbach. So this is a picture of Euler, and this is one of Goldbach. And this has been verified till 4 into 10 raised to the power 18, but it still remains to be an open problem. All these images are taken from the internet, and this is a snapshot of the letter which was written by Leonhard Euler to Christian Goldbach stating the conjecture. But this hasn't yet been proved. The twin prime conjecture. So number theory is full of such conjectures which are still waiting to be proved. The fact that there are infinitely many primes p, such that p plus 2 is also prime. So if you look at, say, 3 and 5, so 3 and 5, 5 and 7, 11 and 13, 17, 19, these are twin primes. They have a gap of 2 and both are primes. So the fact that there are infinitely many such pairs is again an open problem. Stepping a little out of number theory into simple counting problems. Well, Sudoku, for example. How many different Sudoku squares of size n cross n are there? So we know that you can actually verify for yourself. It's not very difficult to count for the 4x4 case. So if you have a 4x4 Sudoku, then there are only 288 ways of filling a 4x4 Sudoku grid with the numbers that are, say, 1, 2, 3, 4. But if you look at 9 cross 9, this is a huge number, and nobody has yet found a general solution for that. That is, how many Sudoku solutions are there going to be for an n cross n grid? So there are multiple, you can have access to many unsolved problems, and they may give you ideas as to what to search for or what to work on. And one of the sources is mentioned here, so you can look up the Wikipedia list of unsolved problems in mathematics. Okay, so now I'll just share a few examples of, I hope this screen is clear. Is the text visible to everyone?
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Okay. So these are some examples of ideas of projects which students have actually worked on. And I'm talking about students of typically grades 11 and 12 and maybe even 10. So I've been a school teacher for a fairly long time. And there we used to have this mathematics resource center and laboratory where students used to work on projects which were largely applications of mathematics to different areas. So, but you've noticed that, I have colored, some of them are blue and the others are red. So the red ones is what I would categorize as modeling problems, and the blue ones are more or on the basis of application. So for example, I mentioned to you that if you're interested in the area of genetics, so there was a group of children who wanted to work on genetics, and they were interested in exploring how genetic traits are transmitted through generations in a plant population. So they took the case of an example of a plant population which has flowers of 3 different colors. So let us say the flower colors are red, pink, and white, and these are determined by certain genes. So if you know the genotype distribution of a plant population to start with, and you fertilize the plants in a certain way, then how is this distribution going to change through the generations? And for this, they needed genetics is of course a huge area, so they had pinpointed on this particular aspect. And because they were in 11th and 12th, the group of students were from class 11 and 12. They were already studying the topics of matrices and probability, and they used this to understand the problem. So this is an already existing, the mathematical model was already there, so they tried to modify it further and use this. They tried to write computer programs which would help them create these genotype distributions and study them, and they generated graphs, and they came to very interesting conclusions. And this was also sent for a national fair. I mentioned the area of cryptography. The RSA algorithm, as you know, is a public key encryption system, which is based on the fact that uh, it's a system which is based on the fact that if you use the product of two primes, two very large primes, it is very difficult to factorize them. So if I say n is equal to p into q, where p and q are very large primes, and I just declare n, which is a public key, then it will be very difficult to hack it and to understand find out which are the two independent primes. So based on that, the RSA algorithm, which is named after Ronald Rivest, Adi Shamir, and Edelman, the three persons who developed this algorithm. So the background of cryptography was studied through certain well-known techniques like the RSA algorithm, the Hill cipher method, which is based on matrices. And then students tried to modify these methods, and they also came up with some interesting, they analyzed these methods and come up with some interesting, for example, in the Hill cipher method, they tried to see how can you make the method more difficult to crack. So it is not that the Hill cipher method cannot be cracked. So the mathematics allows you to crack any kind of algorithm if you really if you go deep into it. But they tried to see how you can do so, and in those days they used the C++ was the language, programming language taught in the year class 11 and 12. So they used that. Fractals is again a very interesting area. I'd mentioned fractals earlier. So they lead there can be very interesting geometrical constructions which can be done, which are fractals. These exhibit what is known as self-similarity. Fractal objects occur in nature, as I mentioned. So for example, if you look at certain leaves, certain kinds of leaves, you'll find that if you take small portion of the leaf, it resembles the whole leaf. So within the big object, you will find scaled down copies of the bigger object within the object. If you look at a cauliflower, for example, or broccoli, if you take a very small portion of that and you magnify it, it looks like the whole object. So this whole idea of self-similarity was a very novel concept when it was introduced. And this has led to very interesting geometrical constructions using the idea of iteration and recursion. And studying them can lead to very interesting analysis. So in doing so, in working on this project, the students not only explored very interesting geometric sequences that came up, and they were studying geometric sequences in their regular classes, so they saw a real application of geometric sequences. But they also tried to see how fractals can be used to solve, how can they be applied to real practical problems. The queuing models, we know wherever we go, we have to stand in queues. And a group of children got interested in seeing how at a particular fast food counter, where there used to be always a long rush during the lunch hour, how could they could analyze this, the way the customers were coming in, so the arrival rate of customers and the way the service was being done. So they wanted to evolve a method which would help the owners of the fast food joint to optimize profits and reduce waiting time of customers, because very often if there are large queues, some customers would just leave and go. So they didn't want to lose customers. So the students actually went and stood and observed the queue, how they were formed. And there were two groups actually. One group looked at queues of cars at a petrol pump, and another group looked at a fast food counter. And how did they, and they analyzed the problem. And all these problems, these when the problems were started, it was not known that they would send it for any kind of competition or any kind of fair. They just worked on these problems because they were interested in them. But in the course of their working on the problem, many events and competitions came up, and they got the opportunity to showcase their results and share their problems, and the project really grew. So when the students were in class 11, they started, but by the time they came to class 12, the projects had become fairly advanced. And so I'm not going to go in depth and describe each and one of these, but these are all examples. Uh, Cellular automata is again a very interesting concept, which is to say that if you have a set of cells and you define a set of rules by which these some patterns emerge. So there are many kinds of cellular automata. There are what we call is the one-dimensional cellular automata, which are 256 in number. So one student explored all these 256 cellular automata and tried to see what kind of patterns emerge and categorize and classify them into different categories. And another group of students looked at two-dimensional, so there are one-dimensional, two-dimensional, and even three-dimensional cellular automata. And they tried to see how this can be applied to management of crowds. Because cellular automata makes you uh, convert any situation, or it's a discrete model. So it allows you to convert a situation into a grid, and you define a set of rules by which the grid evolves over time. So you can use this idea to model how pedestrians are going to move in a certain place, or you can see how cell growth happens. In biology also, cellular automata. So cellular automata is applied to many areas, and these children wanted to explore how it is applied to management of crowds. So this slide was just to give you an idea that it is so diverse, you can choose almost any area or topic, and you will find mathematics helping you in some way. Now, when you are preparing the synopsis of your project, there are certain things I thought it would be good if you keep in mind. So when you finally, probably the title of the project will come more towards the end after you have worked a lot on the project, but you will need to give the project a title, which I feel should be quite specific. So for example, if somebody has worked on modeling pedestrian movement, so look at this title. It says a cellular automata model for simulating pedestrian movement dynamics in a crisis. So now you're saying that there is a certain place and there is sudden panic created, and how are the pedestrians? There are a huge number of pedestrians. It could be a metro station. It could be somewhere. There are a huge number of pedestrians, and how are they suddenly going to rush? And so can we use cellular automata to predict the movement of the pedestrians and propose a solution where evacuation might become easier? Or a queuing model for reducing customer waiting time at a vehicle service station. So the title itself is communicating what specific aspect you are focusing on, and it gives an idea of what the problem is going to be about. The impact of the use of masks on the doubling time of COVID-19 infections. So we are talking about the number of cases and how much time does it take for the number of cases to double. But when you use masks, is that doubling time impacted, and by how much? Maybe this could be some kind of a project that somebody may like to explore. Or modeling the effects of physical distancing on the transmission of infective cases in a community. So for example, there is a apartment complex where there are let's say 500 to 1,000 people residing in that complex, a big complex. And everybody has been, the people in that complex are practicing physical distancing to a large extent. So what is it, how is the transmission happen? Have there been cases and so on? The SEIR model and its variants, forecasting COVID-19 spread. Now, these are not actual projects titles that I have taken from somewhere, but these are suggestive titles. May I request the audience not to please annotate on the slides? Okay, so the introduction of your, so after the title, you have to come to an introduction. And so this section should include the rationale for the exploration, that why you have, did this problem interest you, and some background may be provided as to the kind of work that has already taken place related to that problem and phenomenon. So it gives a little bit of a background and where you have taken forward from. So for example, if it was related to, the modeling the pedestrian behavior, so you could cite some studies related to modeling crowd behavior. So there are a lot of studies you will find that have already taken place. So you may like to mention some of the studies and the researches done by other people. The pedestrian behavior, how is it in normal situations, and how is it in emergency or panic situations? So obviously there would be starkly different, and that there would be simulation models already available. So you could study those models and mention. So anything that informs your project, that could be mentioned in the introduction part. Then there would be probably a section for mathematical preliminaries where you just state the basic mathematical theory that you are using. So if you are using the topic of you are using cellular automata to work to model your problem, then you may, and specifically two-dimensional cellular automata, then you may want to list out some of the important results and properties which of cellular automata which you are going to use in your project. Then you need to state the aim of the project, which must be clear. It should have a clear aim at the beginning of your exploration. So for example, your aim, you could have two aims in your synopsis. So one could be to model the behavior of a crowd during a panic situation in a hall. So you are, suppose you are a school, you are obviously in school, and you have this hall in your school where your school assemblies take place. And every school has an evacuation procedure, and a lot of times drills are being done. But it may have occurred to you that in the hall that I reside, there are only two exits in the front. And suppose there is a panic situation, what's going to happen? Is everybody, obviously everybody is going to rush towards these exits. So is it possible to propose another exit at another place? Will it be more optimal to have an exit right at the opposite wall or on the side walls? And can we study this using simulation? Proposing an alternate exit plan to avoid clogging. So when there is an exit at a certain place and huge number of people just rush towards that, then there is a certain arch which is formed, and that is sometimes quite disastrous because it is very difficult to evacuate people at that time. Or if it's if it's an infectious disease modeling that is happening, then you could model the transmission of an infection in a residential complex who is not using many face masks. So SEIR model is something I'm going to briefly talk about later, but these are the epidemiological models that are there. Maybe somebody won't want to propose an alternate model which is more appropriate for situations like COVID, where quarantining is very much required. So these are just sentences to help you understand how you can articulate the aim of your project. In the methodology, the next section should be the methodology, where the ideas that you have brought together are structured in a logical manner. So the method of exploration used by you needs to be briefly stated. If you can present a diagrammatic representation here in something like a flow chart or a systematic sequence, it'll be much easier because ultimately when you are presenting a project, you have to create a poster, and you have to be very parsimonious. You can't have everything written on the poster. So you have to explain your ideas in as little words as possible. So it's a good thing to have a diagrammatic representation or a flowchart. So the structured ideas have to be represented. The mathematical formulation of the problem, you will be mentioning the key terminology, the symbols, equations that you'll be using, or the algorithm that you are using to model your problem will be stated here. For example, if you're using a sequence of differential equations, then that needs to be stated in this section of your synopsis. So you would now select appropriate mathematical tools, specify important results. This may include formulae, graphs, tables, diagrams, or algorithm. If it's a programming, if you need to use a program, then you may have to present, give the code for the simulation. If it's a simulation model, then you may have to give the code for it. Or if it's a pure mathematics project, then you would be presenting a proof. Finally, it's the analysis, which leads to the conclusion, some kind of a conclusion or solution to the problem. So doing investigations related to the aim stated in the beginning. So every time you have to keep sight of what was the original aim of your project. If you are using a computer software or digital technology, that's also fine. You will be applying many problem solving techniques. To whatever extent those should be mentioned. So when you prepare your synopsis, if you send a very well articulated project, it helps to understand what work you have done and to see the clarity of your thought. You might be making certain conjectures. Those conjectures can be stated, and if there is a proof or a solution, that also needs to be stated in this section. And finally, you summarize with the findings and conclusions. So this is just a broad framework. You will have access to this presentation, so you can refer to this if you think that this is helpful to you in preparing the synopsis of your project. So some general tips is that you need to do an extensive search related to your problem. Maintain notes in a logbook. So while you are working on the problem, this is very important. Very often people sort of overlook this, but if you may have an idea and you just want to write it down, and then you may do certain searches on this. You may do some calculations which you may not even use later on, but it is a part of your journey of discovery, and that needs to be, if you can present it in your logbook in the fair, that will be really good, because judges sometimes need to also see what kind of work you have done while arriving at your problem. So if your poster uses diagrams, flowcharts, tables to represent your ideas, multiple representations always help to show how your ideas are playing out in the project. If there's a computer program involved, you might like to provide the source code, which may, if not on the actual poster, but on the side, it can be available for people to see. And you need to use proper referencing and bibliography, and give appropriate acknowledgements to all the people who have inspired you and helped you in the journey of the project that you will be embarking on. So these are some tips, and I just want to give an example of a very interesting project which was done. I think this was in 2018. This project won one of the grand awards, and it was by Sache Satyanarayan. And so it's, as you can see, the title itself is interesting. It says Solving a Mathematical Mystery, Snitcher's Conjecture. And this was the picture of his poster, basically. So in the center part, he has presented the flow chart and the results emerging from the flow chart. And on the left-hand side, there's an introduction, a background to the problem, and some interesting aspects of it. Which are the results that he used, and where did he carry forward the result from? And the final results, and whatever were his findings, and possible future work and references. So it's a very holistic, if you see this, it comes together very nicely. But the idea came from something, it's a very important conjecture in mathematics, but it emerges from a very interesting story, a small story. We can call it the pizza division story. So how to divide pizza in different ways. So let me ask the audience a simple question. How can you divide 13 pizzas equally among 12 people? Can you think of different ways? So anybody can respond. I mean, there's nothing very complicated about this. Whatever comes to your mind, you can share right away. I would request the organizers if you could just help to.
Participants, if you have an answer to ma'am's question, you may now unmute yourself.
Good evening. Somebody has an idea. Yes.
I feel that each pizza could be cut into 12 pieces,
Okay.
and from those 13 pizza means
Right.
156 pieces will be cut. So from each pizza, a person will get, means the 12% will get share from each of the pizzas, then the 13 pizza will be divided equally.
Okay, fine, great. That's a lot of cutting that you'll have to do. Okay.
That's
Okay. Yeah, sure. That's absolutely fine. Anyone else? Any other way of doing?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Please go ahead.
So the first thought that comes to your head is there are 13, so each person gets one, and the last one you cut in 12 parts each, which
Oh.
would be about
Yeah.
approximately 30 degrees, the angle, and then each person gets
So
equal parts.
112. You're saying that each person gets one full pizza,
Yes,
and the last pizza, the 13th pizza, is divided into 12 equal parts. So 1/12. So each person gets one whole pizza and 1/12 of a pizza, right?
yes.
Fantastic. Okay. But now I'm saying that, look, I want to distribute 13 pizzas among 12 people, and each person must get exactly 3 pieces. 3 pieces. They may not be equal pieces, but each person should get 3 pieces. So the first solution which I got, each person will get a large number of pieces, right? Because each pizza is being divided into 12 parts. And in your case, each person is going to get 2 pieces because each person is going to get one full pizza and one 1/12, right?
So if you want 3 pieces, we can just divide the single pizza into halves. So we have 2 halves and 1/12.
Okay. So, okay, let me see if I can do some. So you're saying that each person gets a full pizza and maybe 1/12 of a pizza, right? A small sector. So you're saying that so the 12 pizzas which are there can be divided into halves, and the 13 pizzas divided into 1/12, right? That's what you are saying?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. Okay, wonderful. Is there any other way? So what are we saying? We are saying that there are 13 pizzas which have to be divided among 12 people, right? So each person actually has to get 13 upon 12. And that can well be 1 plus 1 upon 12, as you are saying, or it can be half plus 1 upon 12. So this leads to 3 pieces. So each person should get 2 halves and 1 1/12, right?
Yes, ma'am. Or we can also do 13 by 36 to get to 3 equal pieces.
No, I didn't get it. 13 by?
We have 13 by 12 and each person has 3 pieces. So again, divide by 3. So that would give us 13 by 36.
No, but there are 13 pizzas and there are 12 people. So, I mean, what I'm trying to say is I want to express 13 upon 12 into 3 different fractions, suppose. So, okay, so let me just...
When there is other way, we can divide the 13 pizzas, each pizza into 3 equal parts, then divide it by 12.
Each pizza is divided into 3 equal parts, okay?
Yes, then we can
So there are
distribute it
39
equally.
pieces then, huh? Okay, so let me again, so I guess I'll have to, yeah. So we are saying that we need to express 13 by 12 in terms of what we call unit fractions. So I'm trying to say that 13 by 12 is 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 12. This is one of the solutions, of course. But can we make these two distinct?
3 by 4, 1 by 4, and 1 by 12?
Unit fractions. Unit fraction means that the numerator has to be 1. So these are unit fractions, 1 by 2,
Yes.
1 by 2, 1 by 12. But there's a repeating. These two are the same. Okay, so let's see. So one solution you already said is 1 plus 1 by 12. So each person gets a full pizza and a 1/12. But if I want to make it, divide this 1 into 2 halves, that's possible. And what about a solution where I have
1 by 4?
Just a minute. Yes. So how about this solution? So we are saying that 13 by 12 is the same. So each person should get half a pizza, 1/3 of a pizza, and 1/4 of a pizza. Will this be correct? Okay. So how many pizzas do I have? I'm sorry, the pen is not working too well, but okay.
It would be correct, like from the math of it.
Yes. Let's see how it goes. We have 13 pizzas. Pardon me, all of them look different, but okay. So the first 6 pizzas I can divide into halves. So there are 12 halves. Each one gets a half. Each person gets 1/2, right? The remaining 4, there are 7 pizzas. Now I take 4 of these and I divide them into thirds. How many 1/3s do I have? I have 12 1/3s. And the last 3 pizzas I divide into quarters. The pizzas have to be of equal size, pardon me. But okay, so if there are 6 halves, there are 12 halves, so each person gets 1/2. So each person, I'm just shading what each person will get. Each person will get a half. There are 12 1/3, so each person will get a third. And there are 12 quarters, so each person will get a quarter. So that is also, here the 3 fractions are distinct. And these are also termed as Egyptian fractions, where the 3, so we write a fraction, say m upon n as 1 upon x plus 1 upon y plus 1 upon z, where x, y, z are distinct. So this interesting simple problem, there's a very famous conjecture called the Erdős-Strauss conjecture, which says that for every integer n greater than or equal to 2, there exists positive integers x, y, and z such that 4 upon n is equal to sum of unit fractions 1 upon x plus 1 upon y plus 1 upon z. Now in their conjecture, they did not say it is essential for these 3 to be distinct for a certain reason. And then they said that this is possible. So if, instead of 4, if we keep 2, or if we keep, so for 2 and 3, we have solutions. But suppose it is, let's take the example. So I need to again use my stylus. Okay, so let me say, suppose I want to put n is equal to 2. So can I write it as a sum of 3 fractions? So how can I write 4 upon 2 as, can you tell me what would be x, y, and z if it is not essential for x, y, and z to be distinct? And can somebody tell me for 4 upon 3 also?
One upon 1 plus 1 upon 3 plus 1 upon 1 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 2.
Wonderful. So 1 plus half, right? That's actually 2. Right, great. And what about 4 upon 3?
One by 3 plus 1 by 3 plus 2 by 3.
No, unit fractions. We need 1 upon.
Yeah.
1 upon 1 plus 1 upon 6 and 1 upon 6.
1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 3.
1 upon 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus
1 upon 3.
Yes. It's 1 1/3, right? 4 by 3 is 1 1/3. So that's half plus 1/3. Okay. 4 by 4 is 1. So we know that we can write it as 1/3 plus 1/3 plus, because I need 3 fractions and I need 3 denominators, not necessarily distinct. Okay. What about 4 by 5?
One upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 5.
2 by 5 plus 1 by 5 plus 1 by 5.
Well, you need to have unit fractions. So your numerator cannot
1
be
upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 5.
1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 5 is what?
No, that would be different.
6. That is 6
ये
upon 5.
2/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5.
Okay, let me give the answer. You can think about this. It should be, I said they have to be unit fractions, right? So 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 5 plus 1 upon 10. How about this?
2/5 plus 1/5 plus 1/5.
Yes, but you can't use 2 upon 5 because you need the numerator to be a unit, 1. It has to be, so one of the solutions is 1 upon 2 plus 1 upon 5 plus 1
5
upon
means
10.
okay.
Okay. Anyway, that's absolutely fine. You can try different examples. So it's like saying, you know, if there are 4 pizzas and they have to be equally divided among 5 people, then probably this is also a way where you give each person a half a pizza, a 1/5 of a pizza, and 1/10 of a pizza. So just like what we did for 13 and 12. Anyway, so this is the Erdős-Strauss conjecture said that there, for every n greater than or equal to 2, there exists positive integers such that this has a solution. And so you can test it out for different values of n. And they have computer searches have done it for very large values of n also. But Snitzel talked about the conjecture. He generalized it further, saying that for any positive integer m, there exists a positive integer n such that for a small n greater than or equal to capital N, any fraction, any rational number of the form m upon n can also be written as the sum of 3 unit fractions. And specific case of m, see, this is the case of m equal to 4. That is already the Erdős-Strauss conjecture. But if I now make it 5, this was also proved by someone, and nobody had attempted for m is equal to 6. So this is what, this is what Sachet had worked on. So he had looked at this equation for 6, for m equal to 6, and he had found some solutions for that. And it's not very trivial actually. So a lot of number theory was involved. So the mathematical tools that he needed for the project was to understand some aspects and results of number theory, which he had to go through himself and with the help of his mentor. And that is how the project evolved. I do hope he's carrying forward the work wherever he is now. Okay. Now we move forward to a very different area. We were talking about number theory and some Egypt. So Egyptians, by the way, used the idea of these fractions to make divisions of various things like property in their civilization, how property was divided. So use of fractions was something very much prevalent in their era. Now we come to infectious diseases. Just some basic points that the world's we all know, we've heard about the Spanish flu of 1918. There have been other epidemics, like in 1989 there was hepatitis C, 1990 and 1993 there was the hantavirus. HIV came along. Agents of disease spread are usually virus, bacteria, protozoa, and worms. And it was in 1760 when smallpox was very much prevalent. Daniel Bernoulli had produced the first mathematical model for epidemics. And he had done a lot of experimentation, with techniques of inoculating patients with weaker or dead viruses to see, if the disease could be halted and so on. And there are many other people who have looked at different models for infectious diseases. And why mathematical models? Because they help you analyze the spread and control of infectious diseases. They help you to predict and provide conceptual results, find thresholds, and we are going to briefly talk about the basic reproduction number. Simulation models are important because they help in building and testing theories. A lot of simulation, mathematical modeling and simulation is going on by scientists even in India because of COVID, for COVID modeling of the spread of the disease and many other aspects of it. So 20th century has seen a real surge of mathematical models, but the well-known models that are talked about are called compartment models. So these are essentially models where you think of the entire population to be divided into, let's say, 3 categories. A group of people are susceptible to the disease but haven't got the disease as yet. Then there are those who have got the disease and are infectious, they can spread it to others. Then there's a third category, which is usually called removed, because the people would have already recovered, or some unfortunately would have passed away because of the disease. So SIR, so these are the susceptible, infected, removed. And there is certain parameters which, so the susceptible people, when they interact with the infected people, they would also get infected themselves. So that is how so there is a interaction parameter which is involved. And there are many modifications. This is the most simple model, is SIR model, but there are others like SEIR. So you can introduce more compartments, like between the susceptible and the infected, they could be exposed. So the susceptible people enter the population of exposed people who are exposed to the disease, but not yet able to spread the disease to others. But once they become fully infected, they're able to spread the disease to others. And there are many other situations where, where susceptible becomes exposed, exposed become infected. Those who recover are removed from the population, but they may again become susceptible to the disease. So then you have SEIRS and so on. So there are multiple models already available. And how can these be modified to understand better, for example, for modeling of COVID, let us say. So there are many interesting models, but the very basic idea is that, if you say that I of t is the number of infected people at time t, and you assume that the growth rate of the number of infected people is proportion to the current number of infected people. So if I'm only seeing how the number of infected people is growing, then I will simply use a differential equation simple model. And this is something you'll encounter in your class 12 mathematics, where the rate of growth of the infected people is proportional to the number of people who are already infected. Larger the number of people infected, more the rate will be the rate of growth of the infected people. And this K, this constant K, represents how readily the disease is spreading. So you can use certain initial conditions and arrive at a solution to this simple differential equation, which is what we call an exponential model. So I'll show you the graph of that. But this is not very practical, because what the exponential model tells us that soon everybody will get infected, and the number of infected people will keep on increasing with time, which happens. But ultimately, that there is a cap on the number of people already existing. So if we say IT is the number of people infected at time t and N is the total population, then N minus IT will be the number of people who are not infected but are susceptible. And we can frame an equation which talks about the interaction between the infected and the susceptible people. And this kind of a model is much more realistic, because when we solve it and we plot the graph, we see the following. That the exponential growth happens, it keeps on increasing. But the logistic model, the second model, tells us that, like here, I'm just a simple situation. We consider a small town of 5,000 residents. 10 residents get a cold after visiting another town. Compare the exponential model of viral infection growth with the logistic model. This is the exponential, this is the logistic. So this initially grows very quickly, but ultimately it steadies out, because there are only 5,000 residents, and once everybody has got infected, there are no more people left to get infected. So typically the logistic model is preferred over the exponential model, but that depends on the total population that you are looking at. Finally, when we come to the SIR model, which is the susceptible, infected, and removed, here we say that ST, IT, and because these are all functions of time. So the number of susceptible, infected, and recovered people at time t. And so we frame the equations like this, that the rate of growth of the susceptible people depends on the interaction between the infected and the susceptible. So there's a product term of I and S, where I represents the IT and S is ST. And beta is the contact rate, the rate at which there's a contact between these two. This contact rate, for example, in the case of COVID, can be reduced by distancing or by use of masks and so on. So the ds by dt is a minus sign, because as more and more susceptible people are getting infected, the population of susceptible is reducing, and therefore there's a minus sign here. But these people are joining the next compartment, which is the infected people. So the rate of growth of the infected people is the same term, minus the number of people who are recovering, let us say. So, and finally, our the rate of growth of the recovered people is in terms of I. So this is, you don't have to worry if you don't understand the specifics of the differential equation, but it's a simple model which uses 3 differential equations. And when we look at the graph, now this graph is taken from actual data. It is taken from in a particular boarding school of boys boarding school many years ago in England. There were about 800 students, not 800, there were 768 students or something like that. And they soon, one or two of them had a viral fever and soon all got infected. Now, how did that, so this orange curve shows the susceptible. So initially all were susceptible, but the curve is coming down because the susceptible people are becoming infected and recovering also. The blue graph is the infected people. So you see the number of infections is going up. It peaks at a certain time and it comes down. And finally, all of them did recover, thankfully. And it was a viral fever. So the green graph is a recovered. So the recovered graph is more of the logistic shape. The orange graph is that of the susceptible. And the interesting is the infection, the infected population, which is more like a bell-shaped curve with a peak. And when we say talk about flattening the curve, what we are saying is that instead of making it so peaked, can we spread it out more so that there isn't a sudden influx of patients into hospitals and so on. So the assumptions, there are many assumptions, and it's a very simplified model. And when you are doing modeling, you have to make certain assumptions. And the assumptions are that the population remains constant during the epidemic, which is not realistic. So there are other models which take care of that. The rate at which the susceptible become infected is proportional to the product of the number of infected and susceptible. And the rate at which people are recovering is proportional to the number of infectives only. These are certain assumptions. And we look at something called R0. Everybody is talking of R0 in the context of COVID also. It is a threshold number. It kind of tells you that a single infected person has the potential to infect how many others in a very crude sense. So this is actually R0 is the number of secondary infections that can be caused. And if you look at this equation di by dt, which was beta is minus gamma I, and if you take gamma I common from here, notice that di by dt will be positive when this beta s upon gamma is greater than 1. When this happens, that means we are saying that the infections are going to increase when this beta s upon gamma is greater than 1, that is R0 is greater than 1. So if R0 is greater than 1, in the case of COVID, the R0 keeps changing depending on regions and depending on places. It has ranged from say 1.2 to 2.5. Other diseases have other values of R0. But in the case of COVID, it has ranged between these two, between 1.2 to 2.5, depending on the place. But if R0 can be reduced and made less than 1, then the outbreak will eventually die out. So these are ideas which you can explore models for infectious diseases, and this is just one example. And I won't want to take much time because this domain is such that you can look at different areas and explore many interesting things. But just one small example I want to end with is so much of the mathematics that you've seen in the 2 projects that we have described are something which is very much accessible within school mathematics. So when we talked about the Egyptian fractions and the topic of basic number theories, though number theory is not taught in school, but it is very much accessible to school students. If you look at something called Fourier series, now there was a student who had worked with me on this topic, and Fourier series is usually taught in the first year undergraduate mathematics, sometimes not before 3rd year. But the idea was very simple and the problem was very interesting. So we had to use this, the idea of Fourier series, which is actually has applications in physics, biology. It is applied to airflow in lungs and signal processing and so on, many things. So the Fourier series is typically looks like this. So don't get too frightened if you don't understand this. But basically it is a series which involves cosine terms, you know, the cos and the sine terms of trigonometry. So it involves cosine and sine terms and some constant terms. And there are these coefficients which are called Fourier coefficients, A0, AN, and BN, which are expressed in the form of integrals. So if you work with Fourier series can be used to model many signals. So it is used a lot in signal processing. So, but there's something called Gibbs phenomenon. What happens is when you look at a Fourier series and you take some terms of that series and you graph that, we see some interesting patterns in those graphs. And so let me explain this. So let's take a very simple function, which is gt is equal to 1, the constant function 1. Now, when you plot this function, you know it is a straight line which is parallel to the x-axis. Okay. If you work out the Fourier coefficients, we find that the Fourier series for this constant function 1 is expressed in this manner. So it is 4 upon pi. It has sine terms which follow a certain pattern. And if I take a few terms of this series and plot it, I'll get a certain graph. If I take more terms of this series and plot it, I'll get a different shape. So what essentially happens is you can use certain programs to draw graphs and see. If I take only, let's say, 2 or 3, one term, like in this program, we are taking it from 1 to 100 in steps of 10. So if I take only one term of the Fourier series for the constant function 1, I'll get a graph like this, because it's a sine function, so it is a sinusoidal curve. If I increase it, you'll get an oscillatory behavior in the same interval. And as you go on plotting more and more terms, this is called plotting of partial sums of the Fourier series, we see that it actually approaches a constant function 1 within the interval. But at the ends of the interval, there are these overshoots, there are these oscillations which are overshooting the actual value of the function. Now, because of this problem, this is called something called Gibbs phenomenon. When there are overshoots at the end points of the interval in which you are plotting the partial sums of the Fourier series. Now, when this happens, it causes a lot of problems. There is a certain name given to this, and it is applied to actually MRI. You must be knowing about the magnetic resonance, MRI machines. And I'll just skip one or two things. I'll just take you to the last slide. So let me just show it to you here. So when you are just doing one term, it is a simple curve. But as you increase the number of partial sums, the curve approaches this endpoint, and it comes closer and closer. Here it is getting better. The approximation is getting closer to the red line, but here there are overshoots. And the program was used to actually calculate the height of these overshoots. And the project involved in seeing how we can reduce these peaks. Can these peaks be reduced? Why? Because there is something called in digital image processing, Gibbs phenomenon leads to what is called ringing artifacts. So when you take an MRI image, there's a lot of blurring of the images caused because of this ringing artifact, and the ringing artifact is caused because of these overshoots and because of Gibbs phenomenon. So how can we reduce the effect of Gibbs phenomenon so that one can get better images and better pictures? So there are so almost every aspect of real life or any field that you look at, mathematics can be used to explain many things and can be used to model many things. So there is really no cap on what you can explore. And with this, I think okay, so I'll just like to end with a little quote by a very famous mathematician, George Polya. You must have heard of his name. He was a Hungarian mathematician, and he did a lot of work. He did a lot of work in higher mathematics, but he's associated with a lot with problem solving. And we are familiar with Polya's steps of problem solving. So he said, a great discovery solves a great problem, but there is a grain of discovery in the solution of any problem. Your problem may be modest, but if it challenges your curiosity and brings into play your inventive faculties, and if you solve it by your own means, you may experience the tension and enjoy the triumph of discovery. So with this, I'd like to end my presentation. I Hope you will enjoy this triumph of discovery as you embark on a project in mathematics for IRIS. Thank you very much for a patient listening.
Thank you so much, Janki ma'am.
Thank you, Sharon. Yeah.
We are now open for questions. So if you have any questions, you may either type those into the chat section, or you could raise your hand and we will unmute your microphone so that you can ask our expert panelists your question.
Oh, Sharon, I'm stopping the sharing of my screen then, right?
Yes, thank you, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you.
Shrey will put on the rest of the slides, ma'am.
Thank you. Thank you.
We have a question from Srinab Agarwal. I think Srinab has been a participant in the past as well. I will unmute his microphone.
Hello, good evening, ma'am.
Good evening.
Srinab this side.
Yes.
So, ma'am, I basically worked on a graphical proof of an algorithm, a computational algorithm to calculate the value of a particular function. And I found out a faster method to do that, basically a proof of a faster method to do that using empirical analysis. So will this be considered as a good idea to pitch it in IRIS?
Yes, of course, definitely. Because what you have improved is of a well-known result that you have improved, or it was your own work which you had worked further on?
I won't say it is kind of a well-known result, but yeah, it was published before, and I tried to empirically test it using graphical methods, and basically I did the whole thing in Python. Also, I have some computational improvements, and now this algorithm of mine defeats the default Python algorithm to calculate in terms of time complexity to calculate the value of that function.
In fact, this could have it could be mathematically also a good project, and also it could be in computer science. So that the mentors will kind of guide you once we have a better, a more in-depth look at your work, whether it is more suitable for mathematics or computer science. Probably it could fit into both. But from a mathematical point of view also, it could be a very good project, yes.
Okay, ma'am. Thank you.
Any more questions?
Yes.
There is a participant, Bijoy Mathur. I am going to unmute your microphone now. Yes, you may ask your
Listen to your, I'm a teacher, listen to your wonderful presentation, ma'am. It's amazing. This present COVID function, the way it is going, you think it's a combination of a Fibonacci series and a R0, depending on the kind of models you'd like to take. It looks to me like, more than the doubling time or a geometric projection or whatever, it seems to be a Fibonacci kind of sequence with an R0, maybe a combination of two equations.
I'm not sure about that actually. You're saying that the number of how I'm sorry, I didn't get it. Fibonacci series, how are you linking it to the number of growth of infections?
Yeah, like when we started the pandemic, it was 200, then it was 300, then it went to 500. Then it was not doubling, but it was like an additive, 3 plus 500, 800.
Yeah, okay. That way, but if you take the successive terms of the Fibonacci sequence, it sort of steadies to the golden ratio, that 1.618, right? Are you trying to link it with that? See, because this R0 is changing with time, it sort of varies across places and depending on the measures that are taken and so on. But as I mentioned, in most epidemiological models, there is an R0 involved. And if R0 can be made less than 1, then they say that the infection is going to die out eventually. So, but I'm not too sure if there's any direct link with Fibonacci sequence. Somebody has been talking about whether the idea of chaos and fractals can be used to predict the way the pandemic is spreading in certain places. But even that is a research which is ongoing research which is going on. So, but one can always explore, yes. I mean, the Fibonacci sequence has many, there are a lot of results in Fibonacci sequence which one can see, but I'm not too sure whether there's a direct link with are not in the case of COVID.
Okay. Thank you.
So there is a question in the chat,
Yes.
ma'am.
Yes.
Somebody called Surya Narayan Rao is asking whether developing empirical relationship for junior category is acceptable as a research project to make simple measurements.
Could you please read that again? I am not able to find it in chat. Yes.
Thank you, ma'am.
Could you mention it again, please, Sharon?
Developing empirical relationship for junior category, is it acceptable as a research project to make simple measurements?
Okay, so this is for the class 5. There is a junior category, right? So I think
5 to 8. 5 to 8.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, of course. So, see, much of the examples which I gave in my presentation are obviously related to higher mathematics, at least at the 11th, 12th level. But for the junior category, there could be anything that improves on an earlier known result, or which is, if empirical results are interesting, but it should lead to something which is novel, if possible. Though at the stage of class 5, in middle school stage, I would say sometimes it is difficult to come up with a totally original result. But if it improves on an already existing method for something, then certainly it could be a good project.
Yes, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
There is a participant who has raised their hand, Ritupurna Nayak.
Yes.
You may unmute your microphone and ask ma'am your question now.
Good evening, ma'am.
Good evening. Yes.
So I am a previous participant of the IRIS National Fair, and you mentioned, Sajid, my project was also a maths project and was right next to my stall. So I've had a personal view of this project. But I just had a quick question that when you're doing research and you're thinking about a project and you are trying to find a solution, does it always have to end up with the solution, or can you just end up with like a base that
yes,
by the can work on further?
Yes, of course. I don't think any of these, see, when you do research, you reach a certain result, which can always be also taken up by someone else and improve further, or even by yourself, right? So there is no end, there's no end to it actually. So by the time you come to the final stage of the fair, when you have to put up a poster and you have to explain all your results and all that, something you should have arrived at which you can state as a finding or a conclusion, at least. But in the beginning, when you are sending a synopsis, suppose you start working on something now, and you are sending a synopsis after exploring the problem after 1.5 months, clearly you will not have all your results by that time, but you will have the initial stages. So when you can send the initial, your observations, your model, or whatever it is in the initial part. But ultimately, when you are presenting it at the IRIS fair, national fair, it should have some findings and some conclusions. And you can say that it's a work in progress. So further, maybe within another month after that also, you may further improve on that result. And that often happens because these mentoring camps also take place where, we see quite a leap in the project from one camp to the other. So, but at the same time, to answer your question, it doesn't have to have a full stop or an end as such. It is not even possible for that to happen, I suppose.
Yes, that I can agree with. But when I had done a project was in statistics. So at the end, the conclusion I had obtained wasn't something which I had expected or something that I would call a concrete conclusion. It was a very vague conclusion. So I wouldn't say it was a very fruitful project. So in that sense, does your project have to have a conclusion?
Yes, but maybe you can, if you might take that a step forward and further explore that, you know. So when you are finally finally the project is getting selected, one has to see whether, you know, it is when the judges see your answer, is it leading to something very concrete? And in mathematics also, it sometimes happens. See, in scientific projects, it is easier to see the end result, so-called end result, you know, because if a robot has been created and it is doing something, it is very easy to see, visualize what is happening. In mathematics, it's a much more abstract. Even if it's an applied mathematics problem, it is quite abstract and it's sometimes difficult to produce a final result. So whatever you had done, I'm sure was very good. And but it is also a point where you can take that problem forward. So it is actually, it cannot be sort of compared with mathematics by category itself cannot always be compared with other science areas where, you know, where one creates something and one can see the immediate application of it. In fact, in Sachet's project, for example, it was, he said that the application of this may be in number theory itself, and to understand what application it is, it will be quite difficult. In fact, an expert in number theory may be able to understand that. So that happens, and you should not worry about it. Mathematics is a subject of that kind where there is a lot of, it is abstract, but whatever you do, if it is meaningful in some way, if it can extend some result in some way, it itself is something great to be achieved at this stage.
Thank you so much, ma'am. We are nearing our conclusion. So before we end, we would like to thank you so much, Janki ma'am. And we would like to thank all the participants, the teachers, and everyone who has taken time out to be part of this. We are very sure that this interaction is going to be beneficial to you. We will end with a video from some of our past IRIS participants, which will also give you an idea about how to participate, how to submit your synopsis, and come for the IRIS National Fair. Any other information that you would like is definitely available on our website. So please remember to visit our website and also follow us on social media. We now have the IRIS AV, and thank you so much, Janki ma'am.
Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot.
Are you ready for the ride of your life? Well, it all begins right here. Your first step is picking a category you can enter by yourself or with a partner. If you are in 5th to 8th standard, you will be in junior category. If you are in 9th to 12th, you are in senior category and have a chance of making it all the way to ICEF. Now that you know which category you are in, it is time to find out which subject your project comes under.
At IRIS, you have a variety of 21 subject categories to choose from, ensuring that your project has a category that fits. The categories include animal sciences, behavioral and social sciences, biochemistry, biomedical and health sciences, biomedical engineering, cellular and molecular biology, chemistry, computational biology and bioinformatics, earth and environmental sciences, embedded systems, energy, sustainable materials and design, engineering mechanics, environmental engineering, material sciences, mathematics, microbiology, physics and astronomy, plant sciences, robotics and intelligent machines, system software, and transitional medical sciences.
A display shows the public and the judges what you have done. You're looking to attract and inform visitors about your project. To make it easy for people to access your results by creating a clear, attractive and concise display. The focus should be the work. Take a look at this reference.
Your title should be simple and must accurately represent your research.
Take photographs or videos of important parts or phases of your experiment to use in your display.
Prepare a miniature of your model in case your prototype is too large to be carried along.
Make sure your display is logically presented and easy to read.
Use neat, colorful headings, charts, and graphs to present your project. Pay special attention to labeling.
Be sure to adhere to the size limitations and safety rules when preparing your display.
The IRIS journey begins with registration on the website www.irisnationalfair.org with submission of online synopsis and supporting documents. These entries are prejudged by the IRIS Scientific Review Committee, and shortlisted projects are sent an email inviting them to participate in the IRIS National Science Fair. Winners of the IRIS National Science Fair qualify for an intensive series of mentoring camps and get the opportunity to represent India at platforms such as the Regeneron International Science and Engineering Fair in the United States of America. ICEF is the world's largest pre-college STEM competition. Over 265 Indian students have won over 160 awards at this competition, competing with over 6 million high school students from all over the world each year. Not only are you getting a chance to make your nation proud, but if you're lucky, you could join the 31 Indian students who have had minor planets named after them.
So guys, please don't miss this opportunity.
It's your turn now.
If you're innovative and you really want to bring about a change in the world, I think IRIS is the right place for you.
If you enjoy science and math and computer science and so on, so I mean, it gives you a platform to show what you've done, and you have a chance to go to ISEF too.
If science actually kindles your curiosity and you're really passionate about it, IRIS provides you the largest platform in India to show your talent.
Applying to IRIS, not only get to have a great experience, you meet great people and great mentors at that. They're not judges, they're not judging you, they're mentoring you, they're teaching you. They make you learn new things.
In the end, it's not about winning or losing, it's about experience, and IRIS National Fair guarantees great experience.
Don't tell people what your dreams are. Show what your dreams are through IRIS.
It's once in a lifetime experience.
It's your turn.
It's your turn. It's your turn.
It's your turn. It's your turn. It's your turn.
It's your turn.